starboard portal. De Riker watched as Joe Jamber was knocked to his knees as the hull was rocked by another mountainous surge. Jamber was the ship's chief electrician, a pale, willowy sailor who looked as if daylight would kill him. The chief read the expression on Jamber's face as he scrambled to his feet. It was as if he were mentally composing a suicide note. He told de Riker that water was pouring in through blown hatches from stem to stern, yet the ship's pumps were not operating to full capacity because her new skipper, Lieutenant Commander James Alexander Marks, refused to divert electricity from the engine room. The bilges were already overflowing, Chambers said, and he couldn't pump them out. He's going full power because he's getting reports from all over the fleet that ships are in trouble, he said, his face turned away from the captain. He thinks he can save them. Jamber wiped his brow with a dirty neckerchief. Maybe he'd better think about saving us first. Then Jamber was gone, scrambling down the outside skipper's ladder, bent double against the wind, lashing the sea-washed deck. In seconds, his silhouette disappeared behind a veil of gray rain and scud, and de Riker turned back toward Marks. At 6'3", with wide, strong shoulders tapering down to a wasp waist, de Riker towered over the hull's commander. 4 days shy of his 25th birthday, the chief cut a figure with his jutting chin, long, aquiline nose, and broad forehead shading hooded blue eyes that seemed to flicker with some hidden delight. Among the crew, he was known for his self-deprecating humor and sea chest full of stories, including the time he'd inadvertently helped load the hull's anti-aircraft guns with star shell flares instead of frags during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. "We're trying to kill the bastards, not illuminate them," an angry gunner's mate had finally shouted. His scant formal education belied de Riker's intelligence, and he had booked up from seaman second class to chief quartermaster in his 4 years on the hull. Chiefs were the backbone of the U.S. Navy, and de Riker fit the template. He was an adroit helmsman, skilled at navigation and celestial sailing, and one of his collateral duties was to synchronize each of the ship's clocks. As such, he was also considered a walking newspaper on his daily rounds below decks, spreading scuttlebutt, making small talk, a fair posture from which to take the temperature of the destroyer's complement of 263 sailors. He told friends that he'd inherited his affinity for the sea from his paternal forebears, one of whom, a Spanish sailor, had gone down with the Armada in 1588 and washed up on the lowland shores of the Netherlands. There, he'd anglicized his name and begun a line of de Rikers that extended to Archie's father, who'd emigrated to the United States, settled in Laurel, Montana, outside of Billings, and married a Norwegian girl whose parents still lived in the tiny Arctic Circle village of Sundal. De Riker liked to joke that it was from his mother's side of the family that he'd acquired his Viking blood. But in truth, though a strong swimmer in lakes and rivers as a boy, he had never glimpsed the ocean until he enlisted in October 1940 with the notion of becoming a fighter pilot. He had spent part of his youth as a section hand, a Gandhi dancer, on the Northern Pacific Railroad, and when railroad work was scarce, he'd picked cherries and thinned apple trees in orchards throughout Washington state. And he had a mechanical touch, which led to a stint as a grease monkey, lubrication technician, de Riker preferred, at a Montana service station. But before he joined the Navy, he'd rarely seen so much as a church steeple as tall as the breakers that now fashioned the liquid walls of the canyon engulfing the USS Hull. The captain's paralysis bewildered de Riker. The chief was aware that Bull Halsey was so anxious for a fight with the Japanese that he had directed every vessel of the fleet to remain on station despite the high seas. The smart move, the seaman's move, would have been to allow them to run for their lives. And though it would later be made known that individual commanders throughout the fleet's task groups had disobeyed Halsey and taken the initiative to dog down for a typhoon, no official typhoon warning had yet emanated, either from the SINCPAC, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Weather Station at Pearl Harbor, or from Halsey's flag bridge on the battleship USS New Jersey. The Hull's job was to screen for enemy submarines, as Halsey's fighting task forces rendezvoused and refueled mid-ocean from the bunkers of the lumbering oiler groups. Captain Marks's stubborn insistence on maintaining station may have had admirable motives, but given